altars covered with streams of dried human blood, the stench of which was awful. Huge pits, 40 to 50 feet deep, were found filled with human bodies, dead and dying, and a few wretched captives were rescued alive. Everywhere sacrificial trees on which were the corpses of the latest victims. On each path were newly sacrificed corpses. Facing the main gate of the king's compound, there were 2 crucified bodies. Benin City lies to the west of the Niger and is near the sprawling delta of that mighty river. These days, Benin is just another ramshackle Nigerian town filled with mud-walled houses and tiny shops. But Benin is different from the others in its history. All of southern Nigeria was a land of oppression, terror, and fiendish cruelty, of slave raids, slavery, juju magic, human sacrifice, and cannibalism. But Benin surpassed them all as the city of blood. From the Middle Ages onwards, human sacrifice was not particularly common throughout most of the African continent. However, in Central West Africa, there existed the Kingdom of Dahomey in what is present-day Benin, a small nation west of Nigeria. This was the birthplace of juju magic. These are the various first-hand accounts of different British troops and explorers that witnessed the carnage of Benin, seemingly corroborating the nightmare-fueled details of the city. The city is the most gruesome sight I've ever seen. The whole place is littered with skulls and corpses in various stages of decay, many of them fresh human sacrifices. Outside the king's palace were 2 crucifixion trees, one for men and the other for women, with the victims on and around them. As we approached the city through the bush, we found bodies of slaves newly sacrificed and placed across the path to bring the Oba good fortune. On the principal sacrifice tree, facing the main gates of the king's compound, there were 2 crucifixions, and lying around the foot of the tree, there were 17 newly decapitated bodies in various stages of decomposition. On the sacrifice tree to the west of the main entrance, a woman was crucified, and at the foot of the tree, 4 decapitated and eviscerated bodies were found. On going westwards towards the plain leading to the Guato Road, a sickening sight was met with. 176 human sacrifices and decomposing bodies were found, the stench from which was so intolerable that the sanitary gang under my supervision had on more than one occasion to beat a hasty retreat. In the portion of the city to the south of the plain, I came across 5 sacrifices, decapitations with terrible mutilations, and in the compounds in the rear of the Oba's palace, 6 more were found. On the main road, leading eastward from the principal gate, 11 newly decapitated bodies were found. In various parts of the city, huge 50-foot deep pits were found, with 15 to 20 sacrifices in each pit. The dead and dying were intermingled in these foulsome holes. Several unfortunate captives were rescued with great difficulty and are now progressing favorably, with the exception of one poor creature, who, I am afraid, will remain an imbecile for the rest of his life. After all the living had been rescued, the pits were filled with earth. Following this road for about 200 yards, we came upon the first evidence that we were approaching Benin in the shape of a human sacrifice. Laid on the grass where 2 paths met was a young woman horribly mutilated. A rough wooden gag tied in her mouth was clenched tightly by her teeth, which, with the expression of her face, told of the agony of her murder. At her feet lay a goat with its knees broken. I asked the guide what it meant, and he said it was to prevent the white man coming farther. A few yards farther brought us to another, this time a man with his arms tied behind him, lying on his face in the path, but for some reason not decapitated. The one lasting remembrance of Benin in my mind is its smells. Crucifixions, human sacrifices, and every horror the eye could get accustomed to, but the smells man's internal economy could not stand. 4 times in one day I was practically sick from them, and many more times on the point of being so. Every person who was able, I should say, indulged in a human sacrifice, and those who could not, sacrificed some animal and left the remains in front of his house. After a day or so, the whole town seemed one huge pest house. And these pits, who could describe them? Out of one, a Yakri boy was pulled with drag ropes from under several corpses. He said he had been in there 5 days. So what initiated the invasion of Benin to begin with? Well, in January of 1897, a British expedition party of 250 men were ambushed and slaughtered by Benin forces. 2 Englishmen survived, and news of the deadly ambush quickly reached London. The Foreign Office authorized military action, leading to a punitive expedition. It was imperative that a most severe lesson be given the kings, chiefs, and juju men of all surrounding countries that white men cannot be killed with impunity. In 29 days, a force of 1,200 men was landed, organized, equipped, and provided with transport. 5 days later, the city of Benin was taken. It's important to keep in mind that all of our accounts of 19th century Benin come exclusively from Europeans, who would ultimately conquer the kingdom. There is an argument to believe that the Europeans were incentivized to over-exaggerate the barbarism of Dahomey rituals, describing their rulers as hedonists that suppressed their people, who were in desperate need of liberation and Christianization, justifying Britain's invasion of the region. In contrary to the claimed humanitarian efforts of liberating the slaves and would-be sacrifices of the Oba, the post-war treaty itself did not mention any goal that removed the bloody customs and focused mainly on trade rights to be awarded to Britain. In addition, there was perhaps practicality in the sacrificial rituals beyond fanatic mysticism. With the decline in the slave trade, a previously thriving industry was shut down overnight. With so many captured slaves within the city, and with fewer and fewer European buyers with each passing year, the idle slaves would begin outnumbering the local population and would eventually begin posing a threat towards the slave traders, as exemplified by the mid-19th century slave revolt of Calabar, another nearby slave port city in Nigeria that was overtaken by the slave population. A brutal but practical solution was to decrease the unsellable population of slaves through ritual sacrifice. However, archaeological discoveries in modern-day Benin have indeed unearthed large numbers of sacrificial pits, confirming many of the early descriptions of the city. So at the end of the day, it's without a doubt that the ancient city of Benin lived true to its moniker, the City of Blood. Thank you very much for watching. This is a small passion project channel that takes up an enormous amount of time. If you've made it this far and enjoyed this video, please consider providing a small generosity in liking and subscribing. It makes a huge difference in allowing me to create more content.